With ESO Update 49 a little while back came the Dragonknight class identity refresh. I've already given my thoughts on the actual changes themselves in a previous video, but what I've never done on the channel is create a Dragonknight specific healer build. So, in honor of the class refresh, I want to bring you guys a Dragonknight version of all of the most popular PvE subclass healer builds on my channel. My name's Doc, your host for all things healing, and let's start by giving a brief overview of each build before we get into the details. Starting with our dungeon build, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a build that is meant to provide all the healing and buffs that a dungeon team could need, while also contributing a little more to group damage than a healer normally would. Please understand that this build does lean more towards healing and buffs than damage. It's not quite a pure healer, but it is made with the most difficult hard mode dungeons in mind, so it is a little more on the pure healer side. If you want a true hybrid DPS healer build, Hyperioxus has a great one on his channel, and Healer's Haven also has some excellent options. Next on the list is the Trial Group Healer build. It's meant to be the main healer in a trial setting, providing the bulk of the group's healing, and also providing the major Slayer buff. If you run with an optimized group who can pull off Slayer stacks, then I encourage you to go that route. This build will be more geared towards your average group though, so we'll be going with a simple Rojo build to provide major Slayer to even the most unorganized groups. Next is the Ultigen build, which is meant to generate as much ultimate as possible in a short amount of time and utilize a set whose effect scales off of how much ultimate you're using. In this case, we'll be using Pillager's Prophet to provide some of our ultimate for our allies when we cast our own. Despite some nerfs a couple updates back, Pillager's is still unique ultimate generation that can be easily and reliably provided by a healer, so I still think it's worth using. Finally, the Ulti Spam build. It's a build that is meant to pump out as many ults as you possibly can over the course of a fight. This is usually achieved by a combination of generating ultimate as well as reducing the cost of said ultimate. Previously on the channel, I made a video showcasing Barrier and Atronach spam, but since this is a Dragonknight video, it seemed fitting to go with the DK's standard ultimate. Okay, I think it's time to get into the actual details, so as we always do, let's start with what race and skill lines I'd recommend for each build. When it comes to your race, if you want to be optimal, it'll depend on which build specifically you're going for. For any healing build that relies on the generation of ultimate, such as Pillagers or Ulti Spam or something like that, you'll want to use the Nord to maximize your ultimate generation thanks to their Stalwart passive, which grants 5 ult every 10 seconds when taking damage. For every other kind of healing build, such as Dungeon or Rojo, I always recommend the Breton for excellent sustain. Honestly though, as I always mention, race isn't really going to make or break your build. You can use a Breton and Ultigen builds, you can use a Nord and regular healer builds, and there are other race options that are viable besides those too. I just want to recommend the most optimal choices. When it comes to skill lines, here are my Dragonknight specific choices for each individual build that I use. For Dungeon and Trial Group Healing, I'd start with Ardent Flame and Green Balance. For Ultigen and Ulti Spam, I'd start with Ardent Flame and Siphoning. After that, I've got what I'd recommend as the strongest options, generally speaking, as well as which skill line I use on my main when I was testing these builds. But you guys may know I always like to include flex options so that every base class can be included in these builds. And here are your options for those. Please note that for dungeon healing specifically, your choice in flex can fall into any of these categories. It just kind of depends on what you and your group need. If you're someone who's running in an optimized dungeon group, you'll likely want more damage. For shorter dungeons, maybe you want more ultigen, and for unoptimized groups or when running with randoms, maybe you'll need more healing. When in doubt, I've always been of the opinion that it's better to bring too many heals and buffs rather than not enough because you can always scale back if you need to. Up next, let's talk about our attributes and Mundus Stone. So for our attributes, we will always want all 64 points into Magicka when it comes to PvE. For our Mundus Stone, you've got a couple options. For dungeon healing, I've been using the Thief a lot lately just to squeeze out a little extra damage. After that, I'd recommend either the Ritual or the Atronach. I tend to go with the Atro on builds that have lower Magicka recovery, like the Ultimate builds, and then Ritual on builds with plenty of Magicka recovery, like the Group Healer. But next, let's talk about our food and potions. When it comes to food, Clockwork Citrus Fillet will always be your best all-around option, though I know it can be expensive, so I'd also recommend Witch Mother's Potent Brew as a cheaper alternative. For potions, kinda depends. The nice thing about the new and improved Ardent Flame is that healers have access to skills that provide a source of minor heroism and major sorcery. So, I'd still recommend heroism or spell power potions, but just bear in mind that if you're following my builds exactly, you may actually already have a source of one or the other, or even both, in your build. So, just keep that in mind when you're picking your potion. Up next, let's talk about champion points. And starting with our blue tree, I like to use From the Brink, Enlivening Overflow, Soothing Tide, and Swift Renewal on pretty much all of my healer builds. Alternatively, for dungeon healing specifically, you can also trade our Soothing Tide and Swift Renewal for Fighting Finesse and Untamed Aggression. It'll allow you to contribute a little more damage while also not sacrificing much of your healing potency. For our red tree, I like to use Boundless Vitality, Fortified, Rejuvenation, and then for our last spot, I like to use Slippery or Expert Evasion in trial builds, and then Celerity in my dungeon build. Next, let's talk about what skills we'll be bringing for each build. So as I always mention, these skills for each build will assume you're using the combination of what I'm using. If you're not using my exact combination and need skill recommendations or just have questions about something, please don't hesitate to ask, okay? So, starting with our dungeon skills, we have Enchanted Growth, Combat Prayer, Illustrious Healing, Luminous Shards, Radiating Regeneration, Firekeeper, Elemental Blockade, Trample, Overflowing Altar, and Echoing Vigor. Then our ultimates are Reviving Barrier and Aggressive Warhorn. Moving on to our group healer build, we've got Radiant Aura, Combat Prayer, Illustrious Healing, Budding Seeds, Radiating Regeneration, Cauterize, Elemental Blockade, Extended Ritual, Overflowing Altar or Energy Orb, and Echoing Vigor. Then our ults are Reviving Barrier and Aggressive Warhorn. Next is the Ulti-Gen build, and we've got Cauterize, Combat Prayer, Illustrious Healing, Energy Orb or Overflowing Altar, Radiating Regeneration, Siphoning Attacks, Elemental Blockade, Extended Ritual, Firekeeper, and Echoing Vigor. Then our ults are Soul Siphon and Aggressive Warhorn. Finally, for our ulti spam build, we've got Healthy Offering, Combat Prayer, Illustrious Healing, Energy Orb or Overflowing Altar, Radiating Regeneration, Siphoning Attacks, Elemental Blockade, Purifying Light, Firekeeper, and Echoing Vigor. Then our ults are Standard of Might and Reviving Barrier. Again, if you have any questions on why I chose certain skills or need any recommendations for substitutes or anything like that, again, please do not hesitate to ask. I am more than happy to discuss anything and everything in the comments. Finally, we are on to our sets, traits, and enchantments. When it comes to sets, here's what I'd recommend for each build. For the dungeon build, I'm using Ozazin the Inferno, Spell Power Cure, the Master's Restoration Staff, and then I am personally using Master Architect. However, Powerful Assault is also a fantastic option here. For the group healer build, I'm using Ozazin the Inferno, Roaring Opportunist, Yorvold's Guidance, and the Master's Resto. For the Ulti-Gen build, I'm using Symphony of Blades, Spell Power Cure, Pillager's Prophet, and the Pearls of Elnafay. Finally, for the Ulti-Spam build, I'm using Spell Power Cure, Powerful Assault, Potentates, and the Pearls of Elnafay. When it comes to those armor weights, I think objectively, you'll want to go with either 5 or 6 light pieces and then 1 or 2 medium pieces, just depending on how much recovery you need. This will give you plenty of sustain and healing, no matter which combination you go with, though. I do always mention that I do still enjoy using 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy. As someone who does a lot of solo queuing, that little bit of extra defense can come in handy and has come in handy more than a few times, especially in content with high incoming damage. That doesn't mean it's the most efficient option for optimized groups, but it does mean that it can be a difference maker for unoptimized groups, which I tend to run with pretty frequently. For traits and enchantments, I like to use the Divine's trait with Max Magicka enchantments on my armor. For jewelry, I generally recommend either the Infused or Arcane traits with either the Spell Power or Magicka Recovery enchantments. If you're using the Siphoning skill line though and want to take advantage of the Catalyst passive, I also highly recommend using the Infused trait with the Potion cooldown enchantment. For our Restoration staff, you can use either the Powered or Decisive trait with either the Berserker or Absorb Magicka enchantment. Then, finally, for our Lightning Staff, you'll want the Infuse trait with the Crusher enchantment. And that was it for all of my current PvE healer builds, Dragonknight edition. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful. I do plan on doing one of these for each class identity refresh, and then one probably huge video after all of it is said and done, with my final verdict on what the new meta will be for healers. But until then, let me know if you'll be using any of these builds, and if there's any other kind of build you want to see my DK version of. I know my PvP enjoyers out there may want to see one. Don't forget to check out the link in the description to follow me on stuff and join my Discord server. Before we head out, I also want to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters as well as my YouTube members. Thank you guys for being awesome, and I appreciate y'all. I think all I've got left to say is that I've been Doc. Take care of yourselves, be good to others. Don't forget that the world is a better place with you in it, and I will catch y'all in the next one.